What if I told you that every time you attend a wedding, celebrate a birthday, or wish someone good health after they sneeze, you're actually performing an ancient ritual designed to ward off demons, appease angry gods, or prevent your soul from escaping your body? The traditions you think of as sweet, harmless, and wholesome are built on a foundation of terror, blood, and supernatural paranoia. The smiling bride in her white veil. She's wearing a disguise meant to confuse evil spirits hunting for fresh souls. Those cheerful bridesmaids in matching dresses. They're decoys, sacrificial lookalikes dressed to trick demons into kidnapping the wrong woman. That innocent children's song you sang in the playground. It's about mass death from the bubonic plague. History, as they taught it to you in school, is a sanitized fairy tale. They scrubbed away the blood, the fear, the dark beliefs that ruled every aspect of daily life for thousands of years. They turned rituals born from desperation and supernatural dread into Instagram moments and greeting card sentiments. But here's the truth. Our ancestors lived in constant terror. They believed demons lurked at every doorway, that spirits of the dead waited to drag the living into the afterlife, that saying the wrong words or performing the wrong gesture could curse an entire family line. Every tradition you'll hear about today was someone's deadly serious attempt to survive in a world they believed was crawling with invisible threats. You're about to discover 33 traditions that you've performed, witnessed, or celebrated without knowing their horrifying origins. These aren't myths or legends. These are documented historical practices, beliefs that shaped civilizations, customs that millions of people followed because they genuinely believed their lives depended on it. By the time we're done, you'll never look at a wedding bouquet, a birthday cake, or a Halloween pumpkin the same way again. You'll realize that we're all still acting out ancient fears, still performing protective rituals, still speaking in the language of supernatural terror, even though we've forgotten what the words originally meant. Ready to have your comfortable view of tradition shattered? Let's begin. Pause. Wedding traditions. Pause. Fact number 1. Pause. The wedding veil isn't a symbol of purity or modesty. It's a disguise. For thousands of years, brides wore veils because people genuinely believed that evil spirits prowled wedding ceremonies, hunting for young women at their most vulnerable moment. Ancient Romans thought that demons and malevolent ghosts were drawn to weddings like sharks, to blood in the water, attracted by the bride's happiness, fertility, and life force. The veil was meant to confuse these spirits, to hide the bride's face so the supernatural predators couldn't identify and possess her. In some cultures, the veil served an even darker purpose. It protected brides from being kidnapped, not by spirits, but by rival men from neighboring villages who would crash weddings and steal brides by force, a practice so common it was considered a legitimate way to acquire a wife. The veil obscured the bride's identity until the ceremony was complete and she was legally bound to her husband, making it harder for raiders to pick out the most desirable woman in the crowd. When a groom lifts the veil at the end of the ceremony, he's not revealing his beloved's face for the first time. He's completing a protective ritual, confirming that the woman under the disguise is indeed his intended bride and not a demon or substitute. Every time you see a bride walk down the aisle in a flowing white veil, you're watching a woman dress herself as a decoy to escape supernatural predators and human kidnappers. Fact number 2. Pause. The bridal bouquet wasn't always made of roses and peonies. Originally, brides carried bundles of garlic, herbs, and grains, not for decoration, but for survival. In medieval Europe, people believed that strong-smelling plants could repel demons and disease, both of which were thought to lurk at large gatherings. Weddings, with their crowds and celebration, were seen as particularly dangerous events where plague and evil spirits could spread rapidly. Brides clutched pungent herbs like dill and garlic because the stench was supposed to create a barrier that supernatural entities couldn't cross. The bouquet was essentially a portable protection spell, a weapon against invisible threats. But there's another reason brides carried these aromatic bundles, and it's far less romantic. Medieval hygiene was virtually non-existent. Most people bathed a few times a year at best. A wedding might be one of the rare occasions when someone wore their finest clothes, but underneath those garments was weeks or months of accumulated sweat and filth. The bride's bouquet masked the overwhelming body odor of everyone packed into a church or great hall. The flowers you see brides carry today are sanitized descendants of what was essentially a medieval air freshener and demon repellent combined. When a modern bride tosses her bouquet to unmarried women, she's unknowingly recreating a ritual where women scrambled to grab protective herbs that might keep them safe from plague and possession until they could secure their own bouquets at their own weddings. Fact number 3. Pause. Bridesmaids aren't just there to support the bride emotionally or help her bustle her dress. They're decoys, sacrificial lookalikes. The tradition of bridesmaids wearing identical or matching dresses comes from an ancient belief that evil spirits and demons attended weddings specifically to curse or possess the bride. To protect her, bridesmaids would dress in identical gowns, creating a crowd of women who all looked the same. The evil spirits, confused by the sea of similar-looking females, wouldn't be able to identify which woman was actually the bride. They'd waste their supernatural energy attacking the wrong woman, leaving the real bride unharmed. This wasn't just about spirits. In ancient Rome and China, bridesmaids served as human shields against jealous rivals and kidnappers. If a rejected suitor or enemy family wanted to abduct or harm the bride, they'd have to figure out which woman in the group was the actual target. The bridesmaids were intentionally dressed to create confusion, to make any attack more difficult to execute. Some historians suggest that bridesmaids were also there to draw the attention of witches who might want to curse the bride's fertility or marriage. By surrounding herself with identical-looking women, the bride essentially diluted any curse. The witch's evil magic might hit one of the decoys instead of its intended target. Modern bridesmaids still wear matching dresses, still stand beside the bride during the ceremony, still form a protective cluster around her. They're performing the exact same function their ancestors did, serving as human shields and decoys, even though nobody remembers why anymore. Fact number 4. Pause. When a bride and groom cut their wedding cake together, they're symbolically reenacting the loss of the bride's virginity. The wedding cake, in its earliest forms, wasn't just dessert, it was a fertility symbol, and the act of cutting it was a public acknowledgement of the wedding night that would follow. In ancient Rome, a special kind of cake called confariatio was broken over the bride's head. The crumbs represented fertility, and guests would scramble to grab pieces, believing that consuming them would bring good fortune and enhance their own chances of conception. But as wedding traditions evolved in medieval Europe, the symbolism became more explicit. The cake represented the bride herself, intact and whole. The cutting, performed by both bride and groom with their hands joined on the knife, represented the physical consummation of the marriage. The groom's hand over the bride's on the knife handle symbolized his dominance and his right to claim her virginity. The penetration of the knife into the cake was an unmistakable metaphor for sexual intercourse. The white icing symbolized purity, which would be broken by the cut. In some traditions, the messier the cut, the more vigorous the marriage bed was expected to be. Guests watched the cake cutting with the full knowledge of what it symbolized, and in earlier eras, some cultures expected proof of the bride's virginity the morning after the wedding. The bloodied bedsheets would be displayed to confirm that the marriage had been consummated, just as the cut cake was displayed to guests. Today, couples smile for photos while cutting an elegant tiered cake, completely unaware that they're performing a symbolic representation of their first sexual act together in front of their families, friends, and grandparents. Fact number 5. Pause. The honeymoon isn't named after a romantic getaway. It's named after a month-long fertility ritual involving mead, a honey-based alcoholic beverage. In ancient Northern European cultures, particularly among the Norse and Germanic tribes, newlyweds were required to drink mead for an entire lunar month after their wedding. The honey month wasn't optional. It was a mandatory practice, because people believed that honey had powerful fertility properties that would ensure the bride became pregnant quickly. But it wasn't just about drinking a sweet beverage. The couple was often monitored during this period. In some cultures, family members or community elders would check on the newlyweds to ensure they were consuming the mead and consummating the marriage properly. The woman's fertility was considered so important to the community's survival that her honeymoon wasn't a private celebration. It was a supervised fertility treatment. There's also a darker interpretation. Some historians suggest that the mead was used to intoxicate brides, particularly in arranged marriages where the bride was unwilling or fearful. A drunk bride would be more compliant, less likely to resist consummation, and more likely to conceive during the first month of marriage when she was kept in a state of constant inebriation. The honeymoon evolved over centuries into a romantic vacation, but its origins lie in a month of forced drinking and monitored sexual activity designed to produce an heir as quickly as possible. Fact number 6. Pause. Carrying the bride over the threshold isn't a romantic gesture. It's a kidnapping reenactment and a demon avoidance tactic rolled into one tradition. The Romans believed that evil spirits lurked at doorways, particularly the threshold of a new home. They saw thresholds as dangerous supernatural boundaries where the spirits of the underworld could reach up and grab anyone crossing over. A bride entering her new home for the first time was considered especially vulnerable because she was in a state of transition, no longer belonging to her father's household, but not yet fully integrated into her husband's domain. If she stumbled or tripped while crossing the threshold, it was seen as a catastrophic omen that would doom the marriage. To prevent this, the groom carried her across, ensuring her feet never touched the dangerous boundary where demons waited. But there's another explanation, one rooted in violence rather than superstition. In many ancient cultures, marriage by capture was common. Men would literally kidnap women from neighboring tribes or villages to take as wives. The woman would struggle, fight, and resist being dragged into her captor's home. Carrying the bride over the threshold is a symbolic recreation of this abduction. It's a reminder that marriage wasn't always consensual, that brides were property to be seized and carried off. When a modern groom sweeps his giggling bride into his arms and carries her across the threshold of their new apartment, he's unknowingly performing an act that once symbolized violent abduction and supernatural protection, a ritual born from the belief that a woman couldn't be trusted to safely enter a home on her own 2 feet. Pause. Holiday traditions. Pause. Fact number 7. Pause. Halloween isn't a cute American holiday about candy and costumes. It's the direct descendant of Samhain, a Celtic festival where the boundary between the living and the dead dissolved, and survival required sacrifice. The ancient Celts believed that on the night of October 31st, the veil between our world and the spirit realm became so thin that the dead could walk among the living. But these weren't friendly ghosts coming back for a visit. They were dangerous, vengeful spirits who could possess the living, destroy crops, and drag souls back to the underworld. To protect themselves, the Celts left out food and drink for these spirits, essentially paying tribute to keep the dead from attacking them. They carved grotesque faces into turnips and placed candles inside to frighten away malevolent entities. They wore costumes made from animal skins and heads, disguising themselves as fellow spirits, so the real ghosts wouldn't recognize them as living humans. Some historians argue that Samhain involved human sacrifice. Ancient texts describe druids burning criminals, prisoners of war, and sometimes volunteers in massive wicker structures shaped like human figures. The smoke was meant to carry messages to the gods, and the screams of the dying were interpreted as prophecies. While scholarly debate continues about the extent of these sacrifices, there's no question that Samhain was a night of terror, not celebration. When you see children dressed as ghosts and ghouls going door to door asking for treats, you're watching a sanitized version of people desperately trying to appease the dead and disguise themselves from supernatural predators who could steal their souls. Fact number 8. Pause. The jack-o'-lantern wasn't always a carved pumpkin, it was a human head. The original jack-o'-lanterns were made from turnips in Ireland, and they were based on a legend about a man named Stingy Jack who tricked the devil and was condemned to wander the earth forever, with only a burning coal inside a carved-out turnip to light his way. But the tradition goes deeper and darker than that folktale suggests. The Celts had a practice of taking the severed heads of their enemies and displaying them outside their homes. They believed that the head contained the soul, and by keeping an enemy's head, they captured that person's spirit and prevented it from seeking revenge in the afterlife. These heads were often placed on spikes near doorways as warnings and as protective totems. The carved turnips with lights inside were symbolic representations of these severed heads. The grotesque faces carved into them were meant to resemble the decaying features of the dead, and the candle inside represented the trapped soul burning in eternal torment. When Irish immigrants came to America, they discovered that pumpkins were much easier to carve than turnips and began using them instead. The tradition transformed into a fun Halloween decoration, but its origins lie in the practice of displaying the mutilated heads of slain enemies as both trophies and spiritual protection. Every jack-o'-lantern grinning on a front porch is a descendant of a human head on a spike, a reminder that your family was powerful enough to kill its enemies and strong enough to trap their souls. Fact number 9. Pause. Christmas stockings hung by the fireplace aren't just charming decorations waiting to be filled with candy canes and small gifts. They're based on a story about saving young girls from being sold into prostitution. The legend involves Saint Nicholas, a 4th century bishop in what is now Turkey, who heard about a poor man with 3 daughters. The father was so destitute that he couldn't afford dowries for his daughters, and without dowries, they couldn't marry. In that culture and time period, unmarried women without money had essentially one option for survival: prostitution. The father was preparing to sell his daughters into sex work when St. Nicholas intervened. According to the story, Nicholas crept up to the family's house at night and threw 3 bags of gold coins through an open window. In some versions, he dropped them down the chimney. The gold coins landed in stockings or shoes that the girls had left by the fireplace to dry. The father discovered the money in the morning, and it was exactly enough to provide dowries for all 3 daughters, saving them from a life of forced prostitution. The tradition of hanging stockings by the fireplace comes directly from this tale. Children hang stockings hoping for gifts, completely unaware that they're reenacting the moment when a desperate father found enough money to prevent his daughters from being sold for sex. Every Christmas morning, when kids excitedly pull candy and toys from their stockings, they're celebrating a medieval bishop's intervention in human trafficking and the narrow escape of 3 young girls from sexual slavery. Fact number 10. Pause. Kissing under the mistletoe at Christmas isn't romantic. It's a remnant of Druid human sacrifice rituals. Mistletoe was considered sacred by the Celtic Druids because it grows without roots in the soil, appearing to survive on air alone, which they interpreted as proof of its divine nature. It was particularly sacred when found growing on oak trees, which were themselves considered holy. Druids would harvest mistletoe in elaborate ceremonies involving white robes, golden sickles, and animal sacrifices. But mistletoe's association with kissing comes from something far darker than ancient botany. The plant was used in fertility rites and ceremonies that involved sexual activity under or near the sacred plant. Some historical accounts suggest that these weren't consensual romantic encounters. They were ritualistic acts performed as part of ceremonies meant to ensure good harvests and community fertility. There's also evidence that mistletoe was present during human sacrifices. The Druids believed that the plant had the power to open the gates between worlds, making it an ideal component in rituals designed to send messages or offerings to the gods. Victims would be sacrificed under trees bearing mistletoe, and their blood would be used in divination rituals. The white berries of the plant were thought to represent drops of divine semen, and its sticky sap was associated with bodily fluids involved in conception. When the tradition migrated into Victorian Christmas celebrations, it was sanitized into a parlor game where a man could kiss any woman standing under mistletoe, and she couldn't refuse. Today, couples kiss under mistletoe, thinking it's a sweet tradition, never realizing they're standing beneath a plant that once witnessed human sacrifice and forced sexual rituals designed to appease bloodthirsty gods. Fact number 11. Pause. The Easter Bunny isn't a Christian symbol. It's a pagan fertility deity linked to spring blood rituals. The rabbit became associated with Easter through the Germanic goddess Eostre, whose name is where we get the word Easter. Eostre was a goddess of spring and fertility, and her sacred animal was the hare, chosen because rabbits reproduce rapidly and were seen as symbols of sexual fertility and abundance. But the celebrations honoring Eostre weren't innocent spring picnics. They involved animal sacrifices meant to ensure that crops would grow and livestock would reproduce. Rabbits and hares were among the animals killed in these rituals, their blood poured onto fields as an offering to the goddess. The timing of these ceremonies coincided with the spring equinox, a period when ancient cultures performed some of their most intense fertility rites, many of which involved not just animal sacrifice, but ritual sexual activity meant to mimic and encourage the fertility they hoped to see in nature. When Christianity spread through Germanic regions, church leaders couldn't completely eradicate the popular Eostre celebrations, so they absorbed them into Easter, the Christian holiday celebrating Christ's resurrection. The bunny remained, stripped of its explicitly pagan associations, but still carrying echoes of blood sacrifice and sexual ritual. Children today hunt for Easter eggs delivered by a cheerful cartoon rabbit, never knowing that the bunny was once soaked in sacrificial blood and connected to fertility ceremonies that would be illegal in every modern nation. The Easter Bunny hopping through your backyard with a basket of pastel eggs is a sanitized version of a pagan deity who demanded blood and sex in exchange for spring's return. Fact number 12. Pause. Decorating Easter eggs isn't a craft activity. It's a recreation of coating eggs in sacrificial blood. The practice of coloring eggs in spring predates Christianity by thousands of years and appears in cultures across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Eggs symbolized rebirth and new life, making them perfect representations of spring's arrival. But the original dyes used to color these eggs weren't made from food coloring or natural plant extracts. They were made from blood. In many ancient cultures, eggs were dipped in the blood of animals sacrificed during spring fertility festivals. The red color represented life force, vitality, and the blood sacrifice required to ensure that crops would grow and animals would reproduce in the coming season. In some traditions, the blood-painted eggs were buried in fields or placed at the corners of property as offerings to agricultural deities. In others, they were consumed as part of ritual meals, with participants believing they were literally ingesting the life force of the sacrificed animal. The Christian Church later adopted the egg as a symbol of Christ's resurrection, the egg representing the tomb from which he emerged. But even as Christianity reinterpreted the symbol, the practice of dyeing eggs red remained, especially in Eastern Orthodox traditions where red eggs are specifically associated with the blood of Christ. When families gather around kitchen tables to dye Easter eggs in cheerful colors, they're unknowingly recreating an ancient ritual where eggs were coated in fresh animal blood as offerings to ensure fertility and survival. The plastic dye tablets and vinegar solutions are modern substitutes for what was once a procedure involving the still warm blood of a freshly slaughtered lamb or goat. Fact number 13. Pause. Valentine's Day isn't about romantic love. It's the Christian rebranding of Lupercalia, a Roman fertility festival so violent and sexually explicit that it would be classified as assault today. Lupercalia was celebrated every February 15th in ancient Rome, and it was one of the most important and chaotic festivals on the Roman calendar. The celebration began with the sacrifice of goats and a dog in a sacred cave. Two young men from noble families would then be brought forward, and priests would touch their foreheads with a knife covered in the sacrificial blood, then immediately wipe it away with wool dipped in milk. The young men were expected to laugh during this ritual, though historical accounts don't explain why. After the sacrifices, the men would cut strips from the skin of the dead goats and run nearly naked through the streets of Rome, whipping anyone they encountered with these blood-soaked strips of animal hide. Young women would actually line the streets, deliberately positioning themselves to be struck by these bloody straps because they believed it would make them fertile and ensure an easy childbirth. This wasn't consensual in any modern sense. Women were expected to participate, and the whipping was often brutal enough to leave welts and draw blood. Lupercalia was also associated with a matchmaking lottery where young men would draw the names of women from a jar, and those pairs would be coupled together for the duration of the festival, expected to engage in sexual activity regardless of their actual feelings for each other. When Christianity spread through Rome, church leaders were horrified by Lupercalia, but couldn't suppress its popularity. Instead, they overlaid it with the story of Saint Valentine and gradually transformed it into a celebration of romantic love rather than violent fertility rites. The heart-shaped boxes of chocolate and romantic dinners of modern Valentine's Day are cosmetic cover-ups for a festival that involved animal sacrifice, public whipping of women with blood-soaked goatskin, and a sexual lottery system that forced strangers into temporary partnerships for ritualistic intercourse. Children's traditions and games. Pause. Fact number 14. Pause. Lullabies aren't soothing songs meant to comfort babies. They're spells against death. For most of human history, infant mortality was catastrophic. In medieval Europe, nearly half of all children died before their 5th birthday from disease, malnutrition, accidents, or causes that parents couldn't understand or control. Mothers sang to their babies not just to help them sleep, but to keep them alive through the night. Many lullabies contain dark, threatening lyrics because they were designed as protective incantations, verbal charms meant to ward off the evil spirits and illnesses that parents believed caused infant death. Take the English lullaby, Rock-a-Bye Baby, with its seemingly nonsensical lyrics about a baby in a treetop whose cradle falls, sending the baby crashing down. This isn't a comforting image. It's a reference to a common practice in some cultures of hanging cradles from tree branches, supposedly to protect babies from rats, insects, and supernatural threats on the ground. But it's also interpreted as a metaphor for the bubonic plague, where entire families would die, falling like the baby in the song. Another interpretation suggests it refers to babies who were abandoned in trees to die, a form of infanticide practiced when families couldn't afford another mouth to feed. The gentle melody masks lyrics that describe a baby plummeting to its probable death, and mothers sang this knowing full well what the words meant. Lullabies were verbal protective barriers, repeated phrases that mothers hoped would keep death from taking their children during the vulnerable hours of sleep, when spirits were thought to be most active. Fact number 15. Pause. Ring Around the Rosie isn't a cheerful children's game. It's about the Black Death. The rhyme describes the symptoms and progression of bubonic plague, which killed between 75 and 200 million people across Europe, Asia, and Africa in the 14th century. Ring Around the Rosie refers to the circular red rash that appeared on plague victims' skin, one of the first visible symptoms of infection. A pocket full of posies describes the flowers and herbs people carried to mask the overwhelming stench of death that permeated plague-stricken cities. They believed that disease was spread through bad smells, so they stuffed their pockets and held herbs to their faces, desperately hoping that pleasant scents would protect them from contagion. Ashes represents the cremation of bodies. Plague killed so many people so quickly that traditional burials became impossible. Cities ran out of space in graveyards, and the dead were burned in massive pyres that filled the air with ash and smoke. The final line, "We all fall down," is death. It's the moment when the infected person collapses, usually into unconsciousness, followed rapidly by death. The circular game where children hold hands and then all drop to the ground is a literal reenactment of communities being wiped out by disease. Some scholars debate whether the rhyme truly originated during the plague or was attributed to it later, but the imagery is unmistakable and the association has persisted for generations. Children in playgrounds and preschools around the world continue to sing this song and act out mass death from pandemic disease, laughing and getting back up to do it again, completely unaware that they're playing a game about one of the most horrific catastrophes in human history. Fact number 16. Pause. The tooth fairy isn't a benevolent sprite who exchanges money for baby teeth. It's rooted in superstitions about witches and magic users collecting body parts for spells. Throughout European history, teeth, hair, nail clippings, and blood were considered extremely powerful magical components because they came from the body and retained a connection to the person they came from. Witches and sorcerers supposedly used these items to cast spells on their original owners, creating curses that could cause illness, bad luck, or death. Parents were terrified that if their children's baby teeth fell into the wrong hands, those teeth could be used against the child in dark magic. Different cultures developed various rituals to safely dispose of baby teeth. Some traditions required burning the tooth, others burying it in specific locations, and some involved throwing it in particular directions while reciting protective chants. In Norse cultures, children's teeth were considered so valuable that warriors would pay for them and wear them as talismans, believing that baby teeth carried powerful protective magic that would keep them safe in battle. The modern tooth fairy tradition emerged in the early 20th century in America, combining these various superstitions into a single character who would take the tooth away safely in exchange for a small payment. The money wasn't originally meant as a gift, but as a transaction, buying the tooth to ensure it couldn't be stolen and used for malicious purposes. When parents sneak into their children's rooms at night to swap teeth for coins, they're performing a protective ritual designed to prevent witches from acquiring pieces of their children's bodies and using those pieces to cause harm through sympathetic magic. Fact number 17. Pause. Birthday candles and the ritual of blowing them out comes from ancient Greek ceremonies honoring Artemis, goddess of the hunt, and involved offerings carried to the gods through smoke and fire. The Greeks would bake round cakes to symbolize the full moon, which was sacred to Artemis, and place candles on top to make the cakes glow like the moon itself. But these weren't birthday celebrations, as we understand them. They were religious rituals, and the candles served a specific supernatural function. When worshippers blew out the candles, they believed the smoke carried their prayers and wishes directly to the gods. The act of extinguishing the flame was a form of sacrifice, sending the fire's energy upward as an offering. In some interpretations, the smoke represented the human soul or life force being offered to the deity in exchange for divine favor. The tradition also connects to German Kinderfeste celebrations for children, where candles were lit at dawn on a child's birthday and left burning all day until the family celebration in the evening. One candle represented each year of the child's life, plus one extra called the light of life, which represented the hope that the child would survive another year. In an era of high child mortality, this wasn't a given. The candles burned down throughout the day, symbolizing the passage of time and the consumption of life itself. When the child finally blew out the candles, they were metaphorically extinguishing their past life and being reborn into a new year, a ritual death and resurrection performed annually. Modern birthday parties still use this same structure, candles representing years of life, a wish made in secret, and the breath that extinguishes the flames and supposedly makes the wish come true by sending it to whatever supernatural forces might be listening. Fact number 18. Pause. The piñata isn't just a fun party game. It originated as a ritual for beating demons. The piñata was brought to Mexico by Spanish conquistadors in the 16th century, but its origins trace back even further to China, where similar objects were used during New Year celebrations. The Chinese version involved filling paper figures shaped like cows or oxen with seeds and grains, then beating them with sticks to release the contents as offerings to ensure a good agricultural season. When this tradition reached Europe, it was transformed by the Catholic Church into a religious object lesson. The traditional piñata had 7 points, each representing one of the 7 deadly sins. The colorful, attractive exterior represented the temptations of sin, and how evil disguises itself as something appealing. The blindfold represented blind faith, and the stick was the weapon given to believers to destroy sin. The candy and treats inside represented the rewards of heaven that come from defeating temptation. Children would take turns beating the piñata, while others chanted and encouraged them, and the violent destruction of the demon figure was considered both entertainment and religious instruction. When the piñata finally broke and candy spilled everywhere, it symbolized the triumph of good over evil and the blessings that follow spiritual victory. In pre-Columbian Mesoamerica, the Aztecs and Mayans had their own version involving clay pots decorated with feathers. These pots were broken as part of ceremonies honoring their gods, and some historians suggest these rituals involved more than just symbolic violence. Regardless of which origin story is most accurate, the core concept remains the same. The piñata represents something dangerous or evil that must be violently destroyed through repeated beating, and children celebrate by scrambling to collect the rewards of that destruction. Fact number 19. Pause. Children's counting rhymes used to select who's it in games have disturbing origins in selection processes for violence and slavery. The most infamous example is eeny, meeny, miny, mo, which in its original versions contained explicitly racist language used to dehumanize enslaved African Americans. The rhyme was used by slave traders and overseers to select individuals for punishment, sale, or forced labor, turning a children's game into a method for choosing victims. Even after the most offensive words were removed and replaced, the structure remained, a random selection process with one person singled out, often for an unpleasant role. Many counting rhymes have similar dark histories. Some were used to select which child in a poor family would be sent away to work, which soldiers would draw the most dangerous assignments, or which member of a group would be sacrificed when food ran short during famines or harsh winters. The seemingly random nature of the rhymes gave these selections an appearance of fate or divine will rather than human choice, making them psychologically easier to accept. In some cultures, counting rhymes were used to select victims for ritual sacrifice, or to determine which accused witch would be executed first. The sing-song quality and rhythmic pattern helped mask the horror of what was being decided, turning life or death selections into something that sounded playful and innocent. Modern children use these same rhymes to decide who will be the seeker in hide and seek, or who gets first turn in a game, never knowing that the pattern they're reciting was once used to select human beings for suffering, enslavement, and death. The playground game preserves the selection mechanism while erasing the memory of what was originally being selected. Funeral and mourning customs. Pause. Fact number 20. Pause. Funeral wakes with abundant alcohol aren't about celebrating the deceased person's life. They're about keeping the corpse drunk so its spirit won't come back to haunt the living. In Irish tradition, wakes could last for days, with the body of the deceased laid out in the home while family and friends gathered to drink, tell stories, and maintain a constant presence around the corpse. But this wasn't primarily about grief or remembrance. People believed that the newly dead were confused, angry, and potentially dangerous. The spirit might not understand that it had died and could try to return to its old life, possessing living family members or causing harm to those it felt had wronged it. Alcohol was poured into the mouth of the corpse and spilled onto the body, the theory being that a drunk spirit would be too disoriented and sluggish to cause trouble. The living also drank heavily, partly to cope with grief, but also because intoxication was thought to make a person less visible or attractive to spirits. A drunk person's soul was believed to be loosely attached to their body, making them harder for ghosts to possess. The constant noise, conversation, and activity during a wake served another purpose. Preventing the dead from resting peacefully meant they were less likely to gain the strength needed to rise and walk. In some traditions, games were played and pranks were performed on the corpse itself, positioning the body in humorous poses or putting objects in its hands. This wasn't disrespect. It was a psychological weapon, using mockery and chaos to dominate the spirit and prevent it from becoming a threat. Modern funeral receptions still involve alcohol and gathering around the deceased, but the supernatural terror that created these customs has been forgotten, replaced by the more comfortable idea that we're celebrating a life well lived. Fact number 21. Pause. Wearing black to funerals isn't about showing respect or solemnity. It's camouflage to hide from the dead. For thousands of years across multiple cultures, people believed that the recently deceased were resentful of the living and would try to take someone with them into death, particularly family members and close friends. The spirit of the dead person was thought to hover near their body and near the people they loved, looking for an opportunity to drag a living soul into the afterlife so they wouldn't be alone. Black clothing served as a supernatural disguise. By wearing black, mourners hoped to blend into the shadows and become invisible to the searching spirit. In some traditions, mourners also covered their faces with black veils or hoods, making it even harder for the ghost to recognize and target them. The logic was straightforward. If the dead couldn't see you or identify you as a living person, they couldn't take you with them. In ancient Rome and Greece, professional mourners were hired to wail and lament at funerals, deliberately drawing the attention of the deceased spirit so it would focus on these strangers rather than family members. These mourners wore elaborate black costumes and dramatic makeup, making themselves into decoys that would attract the ghost's attention, while the actual family members stayed safely camouflaged in the background. The period of mourning, often lasting a year, wasn't just about processing grief. It was the length of time people believed the spirit lingered in the world of the living before moving on completely. During this time, family members would continue wearing black as daily protection, a constant disguise in case the spirit was still watching and hunting. When you see mourners dressed in black at a funeral today, you're witnessing the continuation of a tradition designed to make living people invisible to the dead, a supernatural camouflage system meant to prevent ghosts from successfully identifying and claiming new victims. Fact number 22. Pause. Covering or removing mirrors in a house where someone has died isn't about preventing vanity during grief. It's about preventing the deceased person's soul from getting trapped in the mirror and preventing the living from being dragged through the mirror into the land of the dead. Victorian superstition held that mirrors were portals between worlds, reflective surfaces that didn't just show your image, but captured a piece of your soul every time you looked into them. When someone died in a house, their confused soul would wander the rooms trying to understand what had happened. If that soul saw its own reflection, it might become trapped inside the mirror, unable to move on to the afterlife, and forced to exist in the cold glass forever, watching the living but unable to interact with them. Worse, a living person who looked into an uncovered mirror in a house with a fresh corpse might see the face of the deceased looking back at them instead of their own reflection. This was considered a death omen, meaning that person would be the next to die, pulled through the mirror by the trapped spirit to join them in death. In some traditions, all reflective surfaces had to be covered, not just mirrors, but also still water in bowls, polished metal, and even glass windows. The covering would remain in place until the body was buried and the soul had presumably moved on, usually a period of several days. Breaking this rule was considered extremely dangerous. Stories circulated of people who looked into mirrors during the mourning period and saw their own corpses staring back, or who felt cold hands reaching out from the glass to pull them through. The practice of covering mirrors has largely died out, but in some traditional communities, it continues. When you visit a house where someone has recently died and notice sheets hung over mirrors, you're seeing a protective measure designed to prevent souls from being trapped in glass prisons and to keep the living from being pulled through reflective portals into the realm of death. Fact number 23. Pause. Flowers at funerals weren't originally about beauty or paying respects. They were about masking the overwhelming stench of rotting corpses. Before modern embalming techniques and refrigeration, dead bodies began to decompose almost immediately, especially in warm weather. In medieval Europe, and up through the 19th century in many places, Bodies were kept in homes for days during wakes and funeral preparations, and the smell of decay quickly became unbearable. Flowers, particularly those with strong fragrances like lilies, roses, and chrysanthemums, were piled around and on top of the body to mask the odor of decomposition. The stronger and more cloying the scent, the better it worked to overpower the smell of death. Mourners would also carry small bouquets or hold handkerchiefs soaked in perfume or rose water to their noses during services, trying to create a barrier between themselves and the stench. In some cases, bodies were so far gone by the time of burial that gravediggers would tie cloths soaked in vinegar or other strong substances around their faces before approaching the corpse. The tradition of sending flowers to funeral homes and placing them on graves continued even after embalming became standard, but the original purpose has been completely forgotten. Those elaborate flower arrangements aren't symbolic gestures of love and remembrance. They're the descendants of a purely practical solution to a disgusting sanitation problem. The specific flowers traditionally used at funerals were chosen not for their symbolic meanings, but for their strong scents and their availability during different seasons. Lilies became particularly associated with death because their heavy, almost narcotic fragrance was powerful enough to mask even advanced decomposition. Every funeral wreath and casket spray is a reminder that death isn't just an emotional tragedy, but a physical reality that smells terrible. And our ancestors needed something to hide that fact from mourners trying to say goodbye. Fact number 24. Pause. Church bells ringing during funerals aren't announcing the death or calling people to mourn. They're weapons against demons trying to steal the soul of the deceased. Medieval Christian doctrine taught that the moment of death was the most spiritually dangerous time in a person's existence. As the soul left the body and began its journey to heaven, hell, or purgatory, demons would swarm around it, trying to drag it down to hell, regardless of how the person had lived. The louder the bells, the better they worked to drive away these spiritual predators. Bell ringing was believed to have actual physical force in the spiritual realm, creating vibrations and noise that demons couldn't tolerate. Churches would ring bells in specific patterns called death knells or soul bells, and the ringing would often begin at the moment of death if possible, or as soon as the death was discovered. The bells would ring intermittently for hours or even days, maintaining a protective barrier of sound around the departing soul. In some traditions, the number of rings indicated the age of the deceased or their gender, but the primary purpose was always spiritual combat. Different types of bells were thought to be more or less effective. Consecrated bells, blessed by bishops, were considered especially powerful against demons. Some churches had specific bells reserved only for funerals, bells that were blessed with special rituals and never used for any other purpose. The sound of these bells was thought to actually injure demons, causing them to flee in pain. Ringing the bells required physical effort, and in wealthy families, money would be paid to ensure the bells rang longer and louder, essentially purchasing extended supernatural protection for the departing soul. When you hear church bells during a funeral today, you're hearing an echo of spiritual warfare, a sonic weapon deployed to fight invisible enemies, trying to capture a vulnerable soul during its most dangerous journey. Fact number 25. Pause. Bachelor and bachelorette parties aren't about celebrating upcoming marriage with one last night of freedom. They're funeral rites for the death of your independent self. In ancient Sparta, the night before a man's wedding, his male friends would host a dinner and celebration that was structured exactly like a funeral feast. This wasn't metaphorical. The Spartans believed that marriage was a form of death, the end of a man's life as an individual, and his rebirth as part of a household unit. He was mourning his former self, the autonomous person he would stop being the moment he took his wedding vows. The groom's friends would toast his past life, tell stories about his exploits as a single man, and ritually say goodbye to the person he had been. Some traditions included mock funeral processions, or the burning of objects that symbolized bachelor life. The groom was being prepared for a transformation so complete it was considered equivalent to dying and being reborn as someone else. For women, the tradition was even more explicit about the death symbolism. A bride in many ancient cultures was considered legally and socially dead to her birth family once she married. She would take her husband's name, join his household, and in some cases would never be allowed to return to her father's home. The celebration before her wedding was literally her last night as a member of her original family, the death of her identity as her father's daughter. Friends would gather to mourn this loss, and in some traditions, the bride would wear white, the color of death in many Eastern cultures, to emphasize that she was entering a liminal state between her old life and new existence. Modern bachelor and bachelorette parties retain the excessive drinking, the permissive atmosphere, and the focus on one final celebration before a major life change. But the explicit understanding that marriage is a form of death has been sanitized into the more palatable concept of losing your freedom or saying goodbye to single life. The structure remains the same, a ritual acknowledgement that the person you were will cease to exist and someone new will take your place, bound by vows and responsibilities that transform your fundamental identity. Everyday superstitious customs. Pause. Fact number 26. Pause. Saying bless you when someone sneezes isn't polite etiquette. It's an emergency spiritual intervention to keep the person's soul from escaping their body. In medieval Europe, people believed that a sneeze was one of the most dangerous things that could happen to a person. Multiple superstitions surrounded sneezing, all of them terrifying. First, there was the belief that your soul briefly left your body when you sneezed, expelled along with the air and mucus. During that fraction of a second when your soul was outside your body, demons and evil spirits could rush in and possess you, taking up residence in the empty space your soul had vacated. The blessing was meant to act as a spiritual shield, preventing demonic possession during that vulnerable moment. Second, sneezing was believed to be an early symptom of the bubonic plague. When the Black Death swept through Europe killing millions, one of the first signs of infection was sneezing and respiratory problems. Pope Gregory I allegedly ordered that "God bless you" be said immediately to anyone who sneezed, a desperate prayer that the person wasn't infected and wouldn't die. The blessing was essentially a plea to God to spare the sneezer from plague death. Third, some cultures believed that sneezing opened a physical hole in your face through which your soul could escape permanently. If no one blessed you immediately, your soul might not find its way back into your body, and you would die or become a soulless living corpse. The blessing acted as a spiritual rope, guiding the soul back to its proper place. In some traditions, you were supposed to bless yourself if you sneezed while alone, saying the words aloud to protect your own soul. Failing to do so meant risking death or possession. When someone sneezes in a meeting or on a bus and multiple people reflexively say, "Bless you," they're performing an emergency exorcism and plague prevention ritual that has persisted for over 1,000 years, a verbal defense against invisible threats that most people no longer believe exist. Fact number 27. Pause. Knocking on wood isn't a casual gesture to prevent bad luck. It's a way of waking up protective spirits that live inside trees and asking them to guard you from harm. Ancient pagan religions, particularly those practiced by Celtic and Germanic peoples, believed that spirits inhabited trees. These weren't abstract nature spirits. They were conscious entities with personalities, preferences, and the power to intervene in human affairs. Trees were considered living homes for these beings, and different types of trees housed different types of spirits with different abilities. Oak trees, for example, were believed to contain powerful protective spirits that could shield humans from evil magic, bad luck, and malevolent supernatural forces. When you knocked on wood, you were literally knocking on the door of the spirit's home, waking it up and alerting it to your presence. The act of knocking was a request for protection. You'd say something like "knock on wood" after mentioning good fortune or expressing hope for the future, because you were simultaneously asking the tree spirit to protect that good fortune from being destroyed by jealous spirits, evil magic, or the malevolent attention of supernatural forces that might overhear your bragging. In some traditions, you had to knock 3 times, a number with sacred significance in many belief systems. The triple knock was a more formal way of requesting the spirit's attention and assistance. If you failed to knock after tempting fate by speaking about good fortune, you were essentially announcing your happiness to every evil spirit in earshot without any protection, making yourself a target. Christianity tried to reframe the practice by claiming that the wood represented the cross on which Christ was crucified, but the action predates Christianity by millennia and has nothing to do with Christian symbolism. When you rap your knuckles on a wooden desk after saying something like, "I've never been in a car accident," you're performing the exact same ritual your pagan ancestors did, physically contacting a tree spirit's dwelling place and requesting its protection against the invisible forces that might try to prove you wrong and destroy your good fortune. Fact number 28. Pause. Breaking a mirror causing 7 years of bad luck isn't a random superstition. It's based on the belief that mirrors contain pieces of your soul, and breaking one destroys part of your spiritual self, requiring 7 years to regenerate. The Romans believed that a person's reflection wasn't just an image, but an actual part of their soul captured and held within the reflective surface. Mirrors were mystical objects that could see into the spirit world and trap spiritual essence. When you looked into a mirror, you weren't just seeing yourself reflected, you were looking at a fragment of your actual soul that the mirror had absorbed and held. Breaking a mirror didn't just destroy a household object, it shattered the piece of your soul contained within it, fragmenting your spiritual essence into broken shards. This soul damage made you vulnerable to misfortune, illness, and supernatural attack because you were spiritually incomplete. The 7-year timeline was specific and calculated. The Romans believed that the human body completely regenerated itself every 7 years, replacing every cell and restoring itself to wholeness. It would take that long for your soul to fully heal from the damage caused by the broken mirror, to regenerate the spiritual material that had been shattered along with the glass. During those 7 years, you were walking around with a damaged soul, making you a magnet for bad luck and evil influences. Some traditions offered remedies. You could grind the broken mirror pieces into powder so fine that they couldn't reflect anything anymore, theoretically releasing the trapped soul fragments. You could bury the pieces in moonlight or running water, both believed to have purifying properties that could cleanse spiritual contamination. You could throw the pieces over your left shoulder, the side traditionally associated with evil, throwing the bad luck away from yourself. But if you did nothing, if you just swept up the broken mirror and threw it away, you were condemned to 7 years of misfortune while your soul slowly, painfully rebuilt itself. Modern people still feel a superstitious dread when they break a mirror, still mutter about 7 years of bad luck, still feel compelled to clean up every tiny shard. They're responding to a belief system that treated mirrors as soul containers and breaking them as spiritual mutilation. Fact number 29. Pause. Black cats being considered bad luck isn't about the cats themselves. It's about their association with witches and their role as demonic servants and spies. During the medieval witch hunts that swept through Europe and later colonial America, cats, especially black ones, were believed to be witches' familiars. A familiar wasn't a pet. It was a demon in animal form, given to a witch by the devil as a servant and assistant in evil magic. These demonic cats supposedly helped witches cast spells, carried out malevolent tasks, and acted as spies who could slip into homes unnoticed and report back to their witch masters. Some witch hunters believed that witches could transform themselves into cats, particularly black cats, as a way of moving around unseen at night. If you saw a black cat, it might not be an animal at all, but a witch in disguised form, watching you and possibly marking you for a curse. The papal bull issued by Pope Gregory IX in 1233 declared that black cats were incarnations of Satan, and this proclamation led to the mass slaughter of cats throughout Europe. Hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of cats were killed because of this belief. Ironically, this massacre of cats may have contributed to the spread of the bubonic plague, because the rat population exploded without cats to control it. The superstition about black cats crossing your path being unlucky comes from the belief that a witch's familiar crossing your route meant the witch had taken notice of you and marked you for harm. The cat was essentially painting an invisible target on you, and bad luck would follow because you'd been selected for supernatural attack. In some traditions, the only way to break the curse was to turn around and go back the way you came, essentially refusing to proceed on a path that had been hexed by the witch's cat. When people still feel uncomfortable when a black cat crosses in front of their car, or avoid adopting black cats from shelters, they're continuing a persecution that began with the medieval belief that these animals were literal demons and witches in disguise, servants of evil marked by their dark fur. Fact number 30. Pause. Shaking hands isn't a greeting or a gesture of respect. It's a weapon inspection that evolved from the need to prove you weren't carrying a concealed knife. In ancient Rome and throughout medieval Europe, most men carried weapons at all times. Daggers and short swords were standard equipment, typically worn on the belt or hidden in sleeves. When two armed men met, there was always a risk that one would suddenly draw a weapon and attack. The handshake solved this problem by forcing both parties to extend their right hands, the hand most people would use to hold a weapon, and clasp them together. This accomplished several things simultaneously. First, it immobilized both men's weapon hands, making it impossible for either to draw a blade without releasing the grip and telegraphing hostile intent. Second, it brought the men close enough to physically feel whether the other person had a weapon hidden in their sleeve or up their arm. A knife secured to the forearm would be detectable during the grip and forearm clasp that often accompanied handshakes. Third, the shaking motion itself, the up and down movement, was designed to dislodge any weapons hidden in the sleeve, causing them to fall out onto the ground where they'd be visible. A vigorous handshake could literally disarm someone who had a dagger concealed in their clothing. In some variations, men would grasp each other's forearms instead of hands, making it even easier to feel for hidden weapons and harder to suddenly produce a blade. The gesture was a mutual weapons inspection, conducted under the pretense of friendly greeting, a way of saying, "I'm showing you I'm unarmed, now you show me you're unarmed, and then we can talk without one of us stabbing the other." The tradition spread because it was genuinely useful in societies where violence was common and trust was rare. Today, business people shake hands to seal deals, diplomats shake hands in photo opportunities, strangers shake hands when introduced, all of them performing a ritual weapon check that made perfect sense in a world where everyone carried knives and assassination was a constant threat. The hand you extend in friendship is the same hand you'd use to kill, and the handshake is proof that for this moment at least, you've chosen not to. Fact number 31. Pause. Applauding in theaters isn't about showing appreciation for the performance. It's an exorcism ritual designed to drive demons out of the actors' bodies. Ancient Greeks believed that actors didn't simply pretend to be other people. They became genuinely possessed by the characters they portrayed, taken over by supernatural forces that allowed them to convincingly embody gods, heroes, and monsters on stage. This wasn't metaphorical. Theatre audiences believed they were watching actual possession, that the person speaking Medea's lines was temporarily inhabited by Medea's spirit, that the actor playing Dionysus was channeling the god himself. This made theatre both thrilling and spiritually dangerous. The problem arose at the end of the performance. If the possessing spirit didn't leave the actor's body, that person would remain trapped in the character they'd been playing, potentially forever. They might go insane, speak only in the voice of their character, or be driven to commit the acts that character had performed in the play. An actor who played a murderer might become an actual murderer if the spirit wasn't expelled. The applause served as a mass exorcism. The loud noise, the clapping of hundreds or thousands of hands, created a spiritual disturbance powerful enough to shock the possessing entities out of the actors' bodies and send them back to whatever realm they came from. The louder and longer the applause, the more effective the exorcism. In some ancient traditions, audiences would also stamp their feet, shout, and make as much noise as possible, all designed to create spiritual chaos that would force the possessing spirits to flee. A standing ovation wasn't just extreme approval, it was an emergency spiritual intervention for actors who'd given such convincing performances that audiences feared they might be genuinely, permanently possessed. The tradition continued through Roman theatre, medieval mystery plays, and into modern performance, even though the explicit belief in possession faded. Theatre etiquette still demands that audiences applaud at the end of a show, and the intensity of applause still correlates with how convincingly the actor inhabited their role. When you stand and clap at the end of a play, you're participating in an ancient exorcism, helping to drive spirits out of the performers' bodies so they can safely return to being themselves. The curtain call, where actors appear as themselves and bow, is proof that the exorcism worked, that they've successfully separated from their characters and returned to their own identities. Fact number 32. Pause. Kissing at midnight on New Year's Eve isn't romantic tradition. It's a fertility ritual designed to ensure you won't die alone in the coming year. The custom comes from ancient Norse and Germanic celebrations of Yule, the winter solstice festival that eventually merged with Christmas and New Year's traditions. The darkest night of the year was considered one of the most spiritually dangerous times in the calendar, a moment when the barriers between the living and dead were thin and the spirits of winter could claim victims for the coming year. Being alone at midnight during these celebrations was considered catastrophic. If you didn't have someone to kiss, embrace, or physically connect with at the stroke of midnight, it meant you were marked for loneliness and possibly death in the year ahead. The kiss wasn't about romance or affection. It was about proving that you had social bonds, that you were part of the community, that you weren't vulnerable to being picked off by malevolent forces that preyed on the isolated and unprotected. In farming communities, this belief was connected to fertility, both human and agricultural. The kiss between partners at midnight was meant to ensure fertility in the coming year, to guarantee that couples would produce children and that fields would produce crops. Being unkissed meant you'd failed to participate in the fertility magic, and you could expect barrenness, crop failure, or livestock death as a result. The tradition was so important that in some cultures, if you didn't have a romantic partner, you were required to kiss a family member, friend, or even a stranger to avoid the curse of being alone at the year's turning. The desperation that single people sometimes feel about finding someone to kiss at midnight isn't entirely a modern social construct. It's an echo of genuine terror about what being alone at that specific moment might mean for your survival and prospects in the coming year. The champagne, the parties, the countdowns are all designed to ensure that no one is isolated when the clock strikes 12, that everyone is surrounded by other people who can provide the physical contact that supposedly protects against spiritual threats. When couples kiss at midnight and single people scramble to find someone, anyone, to kiss, they're performing an ancient ritual designed to prove they're not alone and therefore not vulnerable to being claimed by the dark forces that hunt for victims during the turning of the year. Fact number 33. Pause. Throwing coins into fountains and wells isn't about making wishes. It's payment to water spirits for safe passage and permission to take water without being drowned or cursed. For thousands of years, natural water sources were believed to be inhabited by powerful supernatural entities. Rivers, springs, wells, and later man-made fountains were all considered homes to water spirits, deities, or demons who controlled access to this essential resource. Water was life, but it was also danger. People drowned in rivers and wells, floods destroyed communities, and contaminated water spread disease. These disasters were attributed to angry water spirits who felt disrespected or unpaid. Before you could safely cross a river, draw water from a well, or drink from a spring, you had to pay the spirit that lived there. Coins were the most common offering because they had value, and because tossing them into water was a permanent sacrifice. The money would sink and become property of the water spirit, payment for permission to use their domain. Refusing to pay was incredibly dangerous. An unpaid water spirit might cause you to drown, might curse your journey, or might contaminate the water you took, causing you to sicken and die. Roman soldiers threw coins into rivers before crossing them, paying for safe passage. Travelers tossed coins into wells before drinking, purchasing the right to take water. Communities maintained fountains and springs with regular offerings, keeping the resident spirits appeased so the water would continue to flow cleanly. The wishing tradition came later as an overlay on the payment system. People believed that water spirits, if properly paid, might grant favors beyond just safe use of their water. You could ask for love, health, wealth, or success, and if your payment was sufficient, the spirit might use its power to make it happen. But the core transaction wasn't a wish. It was a toll payment to a supernatural entity who controlled something you needed to survive. When tourists throw coins into the Trevi Fountain or toss pennies into mall fountains while making wishes, they're paying ancient protection money to water spirits, buying safe passage and the right to be near water without being harmed, performing a transaction that their ancestors made with deadly seriousness every time they needed to cross a river or draw a bucket from a well. Pause. So there you have it. 33 traditions that you've participated in, witnessed, or celebrated without ever knowing what they actually meant. Every wedding you've attended was a supernatural battlefield where the bride disguised herself from demons and kidnappers. Every birthday party was a ritual sacrifice to ancient gods carried through smoke. Every time you blessed someone's sneeze, you performed an emergency exorcism. Every handshake was a weapon inspection. Every tradition we think of as wholesome, innocent, or romantic was built on a foundation of terror, blood sacrifice, demon avoidance, and desperate attempts to survive in a world our ancestors believed was hunting them. The scariest part isn't what these traditions originally meant, it's that we're still performing them. We've forgotten why. We've sanitized the explanations. We've turned supernatural survival tactics into Instagram moments and greeting card sentiments, but the actions remain identical. We're still following instructions written by people who genuinely believed that evil spirits attended weddings, that mirrors trapped souls, that water demanded payment in blood and coins, that the dead would drag the living into graves if given the chance. We're still speaking the language of ancient fear, even though we've forgotten how to translate it. Think about what that means. Every society that came before us lived in such overwhelming terror of invisible forces that they created elaborate protective rituals for the most basic activities. Getting married, having a birthday, sneezing, crossing a threshold, attending a funeral, shaking hands. All of these normal moments were considered spiritually dangerous enough to require specific defensive actions. Our ancestors didn't perform these rituals because they were quaint or traditional. They performed them because they believed their lives depended on it, because the alternative was possession, curses, death, or eternal damnation. We look back and think we're more enlightened, that we've moved beyond superstition and irrational fear. But have we? We still feel uncomfortable breaking mirrors, still throw salt over our shoulders, still avoid black cats, still knock on wood. We mock these superstitions while simultaneously performing them, just in case, covering our bets against supernatural forces we claim not to believe in. We've kept the traditions, but lost the honest terror that created them. And maybe that's more disturbing than the original beliefs. At least our ancestors knew why they were afraid. The real question isn't whether these traditions had dark origins. The question is, what other traditions you're performing right now without knowing their true meanings? What other innocent-seeming customs are you passing down to your children that were designed to appease demons, prevent possession, or mark someone for sacrifice? How many of your daily habits are actually ancient survival mechanisms that you're executing on autopilot without understanding what threats they were designed to protect against? History loves to scrub itself clean, to take practices born from blood and fear and transform them into harmless celebrations. But the blood doesn't disappear just because we've stopped looking at it. The fear doesn't evaporate because we've decided it was irrational. Every tradition carries its history inside it like DNA, and if you look closely enough, if you're willing to dig past the pretty surface, you'll find the terror that created it. You'll never look at a wedding veil the same way again. You'll never blow out birthday candles without thinking about sending wishes to ancient gods through sacrificial smoke. You'll never throw a coin in a fountain without remembering that you're paying protection money to a water spirit who might otherwise drown you. And maybe that's exactly how it should be. Maybe we should remember that our comfortable, rational modern world is built on foundations of supernatural panic, that every generation before us lived in constant fear of invisible threats, and that we're still acting out their protective rituals, even though we've forgotten what we're protecting ourselves from. The traditions didn't die. They just put on prettier clothes and learned to smile for the camera. But underneath the Instagram filters and the greeting cards, the blood and terror are still there, waiting for anyone curious enough or brave enough to look. If you want to discover more hidden histories, more comfortable lies that turn out to be disturbing truths, more traditions with origins that will make you question everything you thought you knew, subscribe to this channel, because this is just the beginning. There are thousands more customs, beliefs, and practices that we perform without question, and every single one of them has a story that will change how you see the world. Don't miss what comes next. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and prepare to have every comfortable assumption you hold systematically destroyed by the actual history we've been hiding from ourselves for generations. The truth is always darker, stranger, and more fascinating than the sanitized version they taught you in school. Welcome to the real history. Welcome to the traditions we've been too afraid to remember.